Father Vogel, we continue our series on St. Francis de Sales' Introduction to the Devout Life. As we're going through part 3 on the virtues, we're in a section of 5 chapters looking at how we engage in speech. And so this chapter, we're looking at rash judgments, that we should not judge someone rashly. This is really the idea of, when we talk about being judgmental about someone, that we make a conclusion that concludes to somebody's character without having sufficient evidence to do so. So, St. Francis quotes or references Luke chapter 6, where Jesus tells us not to judge so that we will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Francis says, how displeasing it is to God, how displeasing to God are rash judgments. Because when we do so, we're basically taking over the function of our Lord. He says we have enough to do in judging ourselves without attempting to judge our neighbor. We are commanded not to rashly judge others, but we are commanded to judge and evaluate ourselves, whether we're following God or not. He says, but my God, we do exactly the opposite. Indeed, we do not stop doing what is forbidden to us by judging our neighbor at every turn, and never do what is enjoined on us, to judge ourselves. So true that oftentimes we spend contemplating how others have gone wrong and thinking that they need to change, where we don't notice the ways in which we ourselves must be converted to the Lord. He says we need to remedy rash judgments starting with the causes of their origin. So in order to remedy them, we need to understand, well, why are we making this rash judgment? And there could be several things at its origin. He says it could be some kind of bitterness of heart. Maybe we have something specifically we're bitter about a certain individual, and so we are more apt to judge what they're doing as being wrong. Or maybe from pride. Pride will compare ourselves with another person and attempt to lower them so that we ourselves can be raised up. Or it might be from a kind of self-satisfaction, looking at those defects of others, of thinking just how good I am compared to others, or maybe being pleased at being able to, I've noticed something that maybe they don't know. Another origin might be from being attached to the same vice yourself. Sometimes we'll find that where we have a certain fault, and so we'll see it in other people because we ourselves are struggling to overcome it. But we end up being harder upon them than even ourselves. It could be from other weaknesses. Fear, ambition can contribute to, he says, suspicion and rash judgment. And that's another part of this kind of rash judgment, when we are suspicious of somebody else. Maybe it's one spouse suspicious of another without any kind of actual evidence. So St. Francis de Sales asks us, what are the remedies? He says, those who have swallowed pride, envy, or ambition see nothing which they do not find evil or discreditable. So it's because of their interior disposition that they're looking at everything and every person around them with that kind of judgmentalism. So he says the remedy is to drink as much as you can of the sacred wine of charity. It will free you from these evil moods which cause you to make distorted judgments. It says those who wish to be cured of it ought to put the remedies not on the eyes, not on the understanding, but on the affections which form, so to say, our feet. So we want to go to what are the feet, the root of what's going on inside of us to cause us to judge those things. He says, if your affections are gentle, your judgments will be gentle. But if they're charitable, your judgment will be the same. So this kind of interior disposition of gentleness towards others will carry into those specific moments when we might have questions as to how we should look at their actions. So he gives an example. He says, "When Our Lady was with child, and St. Joseph saw it clearly, since he saw her entirely holy on one hand, pure and all angelic, he could not believe that she had conceived in an unlawful manner. While he decided to leave her, he also left the judgment to God, though the evidence was quite strong for him to form an evil opinion of this virgin. He never wished to judge her. But why? Because, says the Spirit of God, he was a just man." So we see in this example of St. Joseph, he doesn't judge our Blessed Mother, even though, from a natural point of view, would wonder, well, how else would she be able to conceive a child if she is a virgin? But he did not assume any kind of wrongdoing on her part, but didn't judge at all, left the judgment up to God. And he did so because he had already been developing within his heart the disposition of one who is a just man. And so St. Francis says, "The just man, when he cannot excuse either the fact or the intention of a person whom he knew either to be good, still does not want to judge. Instead, he gets rid of it from his mind and leaves the judgment to God." So that should be our disposition that we desire as well, is to leave that kind of judgment to God. He brings up the question then, are we ever allowed to judge our neighbor? No, he says, never. It is God who judges criminals in courts of justice. So we should really only declare to God really what we've learned from him. Only the bare facts of the situation, and then leave the judgment of the person up to God himself. He says, if you do otherwise, following your own emotions, then it is truly you who are the one who is doing the judging. Then he asks, well, then is it a sin to doubt about our neighbor? So if we see somebody doing something that appears to be wrong, is it a sin to recognize that what they're doing is against God's law? He says, no, that's not. For it is not forbidden to doubt, but to judge. So we can, in a sense, judge the external action as this is something contrary to God, but we are not to judge the state of the individual soul. He says at the same time, we're not allowed either to doubt or to suspect our neighbor except with strict accuracy, insofar as reasons and evidence force us to doubt. Otherwise, doubts and suspicions are rash. So we have to have that kind of objective evidence if we're going to place some kind of doubt onto the goodness of their actions. In the case, he says, when an action is itself indifferent, so it's not necessarily in and of itself bad, but it could have like a bad intention behind it. If we have no evidence for it, we cannot make a rash judgment to that it is indeed bad. So, for example, a spouse assuming, that maybe a certain word, reading more into it and reading or into an action, he purposely did this to upset me, or she purposely, is remaining silent to try to harm me. He says it's also rash judgment to criticize someone concluding from just a single action. He says instead of judging others, we ought to withdraw within to our own hearts and to prepare good resolutions for our own improvement. He says it's the occupation of the idle person to be busy with scrutinizing the life of another. There's only one exception that he gives for being able to place judgments. He says that if you're in charge of others, whether maybe in the family or the state, he says for a great part of their responsibility consists in looking into and watching over the functions of others. Let them, though, accomplish their duty with love. So if we are in charge of somebody else, parents say over children, you do have a duty to be able to judge and recognize when they do something wrong so as to correct them, but that kind of judgment has to be done with love. God bless.